Well, good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. Core Boris, it's been one of those weekends, hasn't it? We're going to go through all of the detail of what has happened to the former Prime Minister in the last 48 hours. Congratulations, by the way, if you're a Man City fan. I hope you're not feeling too woolly this morning. It's boiling hot outside, so I think the best advice is to stay indoors and watch the show because we've got the best lineup of guests you can imagine on the Boris saga. Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, as he is now known, a key Boris ally, is going to be talking us through his resignation and what it means for the future of the Conservative Party. I'm also going to be joined by Barry Gardiner, the left-wing Labour MP for Brent North, who will give us his take. We've already got Keir Starmer calling for a general election now. Let's find out what Labour are making of this sorry saga. Tobias Ellwood, the Tory MP for Bournemouth East. Now, you'll know Tobias isn't exactly a Boris fan, so be intrigued to know, after he had the whip removed by Johnson, what he makes of the latest psychodrama in the Tory party. And, naturally, we're going to be joined by Nigel Farage, my fellow GB News presenter, president of Reform UK, to find out what happens next on the right. And I'm going to be joined by Yuri Sak, Ukrainian Minister of Defence, spokesperson for President Zelensky, about what's going on in Kherson particularly. And it's been a bumper weekend generally for blonde politicians. Donald Trump's former Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, is going to be joining me from the US to discuss him being indicted and what it means for his presidential hopes. Let's just take you through the front pages first of all. Now, as you can imagine, Boris very much dominates. So the Sunday Telegraph, the headline there is Johnson orchestrates attack on PM over swindle. The Sunday Times goes with slightly more negative take. Allies abandon Johnson as Tory mutiny falls flat. The Observer. Furious Tories turn against Johnson after bias outburst. The Mail on Sunday. So that's, we have 4 newspapers in it. It's all about Boris. It's war, duel for soul of the Tories. Now, the Sun on Sunday does go with something a little different. Marcus love split, about Marcus Rashford's relationship having hit the buffers. Sunday Express, back to Boris, electoral slaughter, it reports. The Sunday Mirror, as I mentioned just now, Starmer's message, general election now. What a weekend to be discussing the newspapers. And, of course, we've got the best guest to discuss them because I'm joined now by legendary journalist Michael Buerk, presenter of The Moral Maze, all-round journalistic supremo. Michael, I'm sorry that this is going to be heavily Boris-dominated, but it's just the way it needs to be this weekend. And we're headlining our first look at the papers with a tale of 2 Borises. Just as the politician polarises the public, so too he polarises the press.
Absolutely. If you're looking at the papers, rather tempted to say that he does divide opinion neatly between those who don't like him and those who've never met him. But that would be a bit glib.
Slightly
but if you exactly slightly harsh, and if you're to pick up the Mail on Sunday, extraordinary stuff. The Tiger brought down not just by mice, but by minuscule mice, tiny mice.
Just like Thatcher, says the Mail on Sunday leader. So they're certainly not on the fence.
They're certainly not on the fence. Very, very pro-Boris. They've got Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, who we'll be speaking to soon, talking about him being the master of the unexpected, in a pole position to return.
Is he in a pole position to return, Michael?
Well, I wouldn't have thought so. The Tory MPs I know aren't at all keen on that, but, who knows? It's all rather unexpected at the moment. But the Sunday Times, on the other hand, say, it's all over.
Yes.
The little rebellion is not going to happen. He's not going to have a comeback and all that kind of stuff. And there's a coruscating piece about him by Anthony Selden, who wrote the book, co-authored the book.
That's right.
Johnson at number 10, describing him as serially untrustworthy narcissist who made a complete shambles of his time there. So you get these 2 extraordinary pictures, and I think it's part of where we are as a society now, that there isn't an in-between anymore, and those people who think he's great are not going to change their minds in the way that I think previous generations might have been.
Although, are they fewer in number? I mean, we already know, and we've known for a long time, that there are a number of Boris haters. I think his problem, perhaps, is that there aren't quite as many Boris supporters as he and the likes of Sir Jacob are making out.
I think that's the big issue, and I'm not sure the polls reflect this terribly well. But how many people have changed their minds about Boris? Because look, he did come across as an attractive rogue, didn't he?
Yes.
You know, and all those dull politicians with their grey suits, and their, you looked at Question Time or something, and you knew as soon as you saw the lineup, you could almost write, what they were all going to say. There was something different about Boris, something exciting, something dangerous. But, I think the big question is how many people still go along with that?
I mean, even people that really find him very likeable and attractive as a political prospect feel let down by what's happened over the last 3 years.
I think so. Well, I think the strikes against... There's always the strike against him by those people. It's one of those moral maze things. To what extent does somebody who's untrustworthy and faithless and generally shambolic in their private life, how much should that reflect or affect your judgment of them in their public life? And it'd be interesting to know what the public make of all that.
Well, let's see what Keir Starmer makes of it all. I mean, naturally, he's using this as an opportunity to twist the knife. Sunday Mirror, he's done an op-ed. Sunak must get backbone and let nation vote.
Yeah, Starmer calls it a farce, which, of course he would, wouldn't he?
He would, wouldn't
so,
he? Yeah.
But he also calls for an immediate election. And
it's not going to happen, though, Michael.
That's a delusion.
Why does he keep on doing this?
Well,
it's got nothing else to say,
it's what you do, isn't it?
Do you think it strengthens his position to have Boris Johnson out of the Conservative Party altogether at the moment?
Difficult to say. What strengthens his position, or what will or would strengthen his position, is a kind of continuing civil war, which a lot of the papers are talking about, particularly the Mail on Sunday and so on, that there'll be a continuing civil war within the Tory party, and that will strengthen his position.
I mean, in
obviously.
many respects, he can just sit back, can't he, Starmer, and just let the Tories tear themselves apart.
Yeah.
He doesn't really need to say anything at all.
Yeah,
he might be better advised to say nothing. Let them do the work. Obviously, all the papers are trying to knock this story forward now. It broke on Friday night. That's quite difficult for the Sundays. They've done analyses of what happened in this meeting between Johnson and Sunak last week and how it all fell apart there.
Yeah.
But obviously, they're also looking at what happens next.
Yes.
So we've got the Observer giving various different options. Will there be more public speaking from Boris? He's making great money out of going and doing these different speeches. A crack at a by-election. Would he run now, or will he hold his counsel and become a general election candidate? A return before the general election or after? Writing a newspaper column? Buying the Telegraph? The Observer asks. What's your instinct as to what he might do? There's also a suggestion he might go back as the editor of The Spectator, which I doubt is music to Fraser Nelson's ears, because he's doing very well at that.
I don't know. I personally don't think he's liable to go for any of the immediate by-elections. That feels... I haven't got any special insight into any of that, but that feels kind of wrong. The Telegraph, he's obviously going to do the public speaking. He picks up enormous amounts of money for shambling on and doing the same act, actually, but doing it rather well. It's not an either-or. He'll do that anyway. He needs the money.
He is a great writer.
He is a great writer, and he's a very entertaining public speaker, even if he's kind of... It's a bit of a shtick and a one-trick pony, but he gets enormous amounts of money for that. I would have thought something... There was even talk of, going back to The Spectator. That would be deja vu, wouldn't it? Early 2000s.
But the political ambition thing and this idea of being the next Churchill and having this Cincinnati-style comeback, it's about power, ultimately, isn't it?
Yes, and it's about, his critics would say, about narcissism. He has to be the centre of events. And, if that is his overriding preoccupation, which his critics say, that he wants to be talked about, look at today's paper.
I know. He's the centre of everything. Even, when big things happen, and sometimes when marginal things happen, he's still on the front pages. Now, another story on the front page of The Telegraph, and to be fair, we do like to do BBC stories, so I wanted to ask you about it, Michael, is this idea of Tim Davie and others taking action against liberal bias within the BBC. Now, as a long-standing BBC veteran, Michael, what's your reaction to that story?
Well... I've been 53 years, working for the BBC.
Half a century?
Half a century, yeah. And in my experience, certainly in news and current affairs, there are strenuous, sometimes painful efforts to be, or appear to be, impartial. But the truth is that the worldview of any organisation is the sum total of the worldviews of the individuals who work for it. And the people who work for the BBC are overwhelmingly young, metropolitan, urban, middle-class arts graduates.
Yeah.
And their worldview, their collective worldview of what is centre ground, what is extreme on either left or right, or even social things, is a little adrift, or perhaps even more than a little adrift from that of the country as a whole. The big question is, what do you do about that? And here I'm very ambivalent. I hate the idea of giving a job to somebody on any basis other than they're the best person for that job, either because of colour or sexual orientation or class, or their, and this is even trickier, their views, their political views. It's a really tricky thing.
There's the danger of groupthink setting in, and there's not enough journalistic scrutiny applied.
No.
I mean, you could look at coronavirus and the BBC coming in for a lot of stick for being very much Project Fear and not looking at other angles.
The coronavirus thing, I felt a little the same way sometimes, but the motivation I felt was honest. But there are difficulties when you have a lot of people from the same background.
Yes.
You know, they may be from ethnic minorities, or they may have different sexual orientation and so on. But actually, in class terms, there isn't that much variety and diversity. And certainly in this kind of worldview idea. But what do you do about it? That's the thing. What you have to stop, of course, is people appointing people in their own image, which is a natural tendency in any organisation, maybe even GB News.
Maybe even. Although we like to have some diversity of opinion on this. Much as everyone says, oh, it's right-leaning, it's all leaning, as we see from my show over the next 90 minutes. Just a very quick one. I mean, it is the actual scoop of the day, this, that the Times has got the Insight team on COVID. Very, very quickly, whip us through it, Michael.
Well, the Insight team on the Sunday Times have actually done, and it covers 3 or 4 pages, they've actually done a lot of stuff on the coronavirus. And I think the key point of all this is it's pointing the finger ever more strongly at this lab, in Wuhan as a lab leak. And the key point about it is how the research they were doing in this lab, it all went very quiet when the Chinese military got involved into the research into coronaviruses, presumably on a biological warfare sort of basis. I mean, it's a really big, really important story. And what I find so disappointing is that the papers are just full of Boris. And in Boris, it's Holly or Philip Schofield or something, when in actual fact, something really important is in there that we barely talk about.
On any other weekend, that would be the splash of most of the papers, I would suggest, Michael. Michael Buerk, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Pleasure.
Lovely to see you.